as we're in the last 2 weeks of class, and as you all are working on your final project for the document design and media presentation class, I wanted to share a little bit more detail about the final project expectations and some examples of what I'm looking for and hoping to see from you all. The first piece of advice, though, I have is make sure to review the assignment for the final project. There are 2 deliverables. There are 3 moves that I want to see you guys make. And those are described in the assignment itself. That said, so the overview of the final project is you guys are going to be doing a couple of moves, and there are 2 deliverables. The deliverables include, first, a brief standalone final project presentation. That's going to be due this Sunday, May 4th. Then second, a short memo, maybe 3 to 4 pages, in which you describe some of the portfolio design decisions you're considering and in which you reflect on your experiences in this class. And that's due Sunday, May 10th. And this final project and these things that I'm asking you guys to do, along with the work that we're doing with Lesson 13, is really anchored to the premise that working professional writers have and maintain a portfolio of their work, and encouraging you guys to think about the design decisions you're going to make in your portfolio and how those design decisions are going to anchor you and represent you professionally. So, part 1. For your brief standalone presentation, I want you to make a couple of moves. First, include a title, provide a little bit of introduction to who you are, what your goals are, what your interests are. Then I'd like you to introduce and review the online portfolios of 3 other professional writers, focusing on the design elements and how well you think they work to situate those writers professionally or not. And again, for Lesson 13, I provide you guys with a huge list of sample portfolios of professional writers to choose from, and you can certainly choose 3 from that list to review in your presentation. The last thing I'd like you to do in your presentation is to share and explain some of your initial portfolio design ideas. This might be the color scheme you're thinking about, the typography or fonts you plan to use, if you plan to use any icons or photographs. You can decide the best method to do this work and share this presentation. So you might create a PowerPoint, you might create a Prezi, you might create a short video. That's entirely up to you. Your audience for this first part of the final project includes me as the instructor of the class and the other students in the class as other and fellow professional writers and your colleagues. Part 2. And the presentation should help you craft and start working on this second part, which is the memo. And again, this is a short memo, 3 to 4 pages. In your memo, I'd like you to do a couple of things. First, share and explain your portfolio design ideas. So pick up where your presentation left off, provide a little bit more discussion, share some examples, identify some initial design choices, and I'll show you some examples of this in just a moment. In your memo, you might, although you don't have to, include some of that discussion of the portfolio review of others. And you might also write a little bit about where and how you found the inspiration for your portfolio design. Was it a template you saw online that you really liked? Was it an article in a crafts magazine that focused on different fabric patterns? Totally up to you. So, some examples of the sort of portfolio discussion I'd like to see in your memos. This student noted, about me as a portfolio. And she began with, to be honest, I haven't thought too much about my portfolio. It seems a long away thing I'll have to get to eventually. I'm well aware this isn't necessarily the attitude I should have. As requested, though, I've thought about some color schemes and fonts. I want to share my initial ideas with you. One day when I was quote-unquote doing homework, I stumbled on a site called artvarsity.com. It's a website devoted to art. And one of the articles was called 35 Inspiring Color Palettes for Master Painters. Art is important to me, and this person described how she anchored her work as both an artist and a writer. And she developed this color palette based off the paints and colors in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Another student includes in her reflective memo a discussion of the colors she's planning to work with and why she chose these really bright, vibrant colors. She also went above and beyond and crafted an identity marker or personal logo for herself, and she talks a little bit about that and how it's supposed to work to anchor her as a professional. This person did a review of different logos and typography to get a sense of how he wanted to anchor his professional identity. So he gathered a bunch from doing a Google image search, and then as you guys can see here, the top row includes the examples. The second row includes his discussion of how he felt about the identity marker and how it helped inspire him to think about his portfolio and how he was going to anchor his professional identity. So a couple of examples. Part 3 is the second part of the memo. And in your memo, along with discussing some of your initial portfolio design ideas, what I'd like to ask you to do is to do some reflecting on what you learned in this class and what you're taking from this class. Obviously, you can't summarize everything we've done in the last few weeks together. So I'd like to see you carefully choose from some of the principles, ideas from the readings, projects, modules that we did, and what were most useful and valuable to you. And I wanted to share some examples of these sorts of moves. In this memo, the student writes class concepts. To address the class concepts I'm walking away with most comfortably, I'll lay them out below with a brief summary and a checklist I plan to use in all my design work. I thought this was really cool. The student created a checklist for himself. His first chunk reads audience, purpose, and context. Perhaps the most important factors of any document design are these 3 things. Sid Dobrin, as we read, lists different purposes in his article: to inform, define, explain, propose, convince. None of these rhetorical actions can happen without an audience and context. The student continues, in order to ensure this process is done correctly, considering our readings about audience, I've comprised the following thought process for myself as a writer and document designer. Who is my document speaking to? What is the purpose of my document? Does my document fit the context appropriately? So one example of how a student wrote a portion of his discussion of class concepts he thought were most important. Another chunk from another student reflection is this, and she framed it around compelling principles, and the first principle she reflected on was typology. And she describes, one of my favorite aspects of design we discussed in class is typography. Font seemed like such a small element. What non-professional writer or reader even looks at a document and says, wow, that font is snazzy. However, I learned that while typology plays a quote-unquote invisible role, the subtle differences reflect rhetorical strategies that can hugely impact the reader. And then she continues to draw from and summarize the pieces that Robin Williams wrote on readability and legibility. And then she continues talking about the cultural associations and connotations underneath font faces. So another excellent example from a student reflection piece. A third example, this student called this portion of the memo class takeaways. And one of the first takeaways she discussed was color theory. And she wrote, this was a principle I found most valuable. We honed in here on the subliminal messages that different colors have on an individual based on their cultural background. And she continues to discuss some of the readings that we did and the conversations that we had and social norms connected to color theory. So a third example, just a piece of a student's reflective writing on class takeaways. So to quickly recap, you have 2 final project deliverables. A presentation that's due this Sunday, May 4th. A standalone presentation where you review the portfolios of 3 other professional writers focusing on design aspects, and where you introduce and discuss some of your portfolio design ideas. And the audience for this presentation is me and others in the class. The second final project deliverable is a memo, and that's due Sunday, May 10th. And in that memo, what I'd like you to do is share some professional portfolio design ideas and goals you have, and include some reflection on what you learned and what you're taking from this class. And the audience for the memo is me, and to some extent yourself, because you're creating a set of recommendations for yourself in terms of your portfolio design and delivery.